after many questions, I've been asked to do these undisguised now, so I don't give a shit. So it's undisguised. Subscribe to this YouTube channel and stuff. I hope you can fucking understand them now, because people are moaning. Hello, my name's Will. I'm a real werewolf. If you want any more information on me, I'm actually an administrator at www.werewolf.host. I don't know what an administrator is, but apparently I am one. That website should be up and running in December or January or something. I'm kind of got to the end of the interviews that I want to give. I've done about 50 now, so I'm knackered. I'm coming back on the 16th of January to a TV studio where I'm going to show you the real transformation of a werewolf. That's going to be out there, and apparently there's going to be a number of marked skeptics to actually watch the transformation, and we will see that what I say is true. Okay? That's if I can be asked being there. And I'm also going to prove to Louis, right after this, what I say I am. Okay, so in the past interviews, I'd been captured by the army and I'd been made into some kind of weapon, okay? I have told stories of me attacking and killing and torturing, and to be honest, I loved my job, but I don't like being told what the fuck to do. So, this is the story of my escape from the capture, escape from the army life, and I've been on the run pretty much ever since. I know at some point I'm gonna get caught. It is just a matter of time. That's one of the reasons why I want to get these stories out there, because they manage to hide so many things behind the bluff of media and social media. They lie to you, people. They lie to you. There are awful things out there, and they hide them away from you to protect you. I am an awful thing. So this is my story of my escape. People might know that I had been captured. I had a handler that just was called the Chief. This is quite horrific and it's quite long, so you might need subtitles. There are transcriptions of this if you can't understand my accent and stuff at www.werewolf.host. I hope you enjoy this final story. I'm calling it the end. It's not the end, but it's called the end. So as time went on in my army career, my level of independence while working became greater and greater. They seemed to be stupidly trusting me more and testing me for loyalty and stuff less and less. Due to this change, I was really enjoying the fact that they now had me down as part of their team. I was not just this thing that they would have to employ or deploy. I was part of the organisation. Over time, there were less dicks in my life. With that, I mean less of the faceless agents that chaperoned me everywhere and babysat me at all time, not penises. I often wondered what two men could do in most situations if I kicked off. In conclusion, not a lot, to be honest. I also began to notice I was under less scrutiny all the time. There was definitely less time being followed and less time being directed or prodded into specific directions. I must admit that my behaviour outside work had somewhat improved from a societal standpoint, mainly due to the nature of the work that I undertook when on task. It was never dull and was always gruesome physically and or mentally. My proclivities on Civvy Street really were reined in. I could not beat the things that I was being asked to do for king and country in the killing, torture and murder departments. I was actually enjoying the job. I hated the orders and the handlers, the be here and do these things, but I loved the chaos and the killing and the maiming. This was a particularly strange operation that I had been asked to do. I'd been given no information about the situation into which I was going. The gear requirement list was short and non-specified. I usually was given some necessary information about the things I needed or where I was going, but the list this time was short and undefined. They did not even give me the length of time that I would be away. It was all very strange. I was just given tickets and an itinerary. I was not even given a car to the airport. I had to get there myself. It was also strange that I had not met the chief and that they had let me fly by myself without accompaniment on a normal passenger plane. It was as though they trusted me not to be myself. The flight was very civilized for me. I usually was forced into the back of a shitty cargo plane, or if they were in a rush, a private jet. Sometimes I flew on passenger jets with others, but then only accompanied by handlers in the hope that they would stop me doing anything rash. I took this as one of their usual tests. The plane was probably entirely full of their people, as the chief called them. I was tempted for a brief moment to see if I could cause a plane crash, test my powers of survival, but although it would be fun in its own way, it would probably lead to inquiries and such like. I would be back in my cage somewhere getting bored if I did the whole plane crash thing. The powers that be did not really enjoy me mixing with the ordinary people. This always seemed weird to me, as after the job they would just let me run back into the general population without care. For some reason on missions though, things tended to get complicated and out of hand, and then they would have to provide cover for the deaths and damage that I committed. Never my fault, obviously. I never looked for trouble. It just finds me. The flight was very relaxing. I sat in first class and drank champagne, ate strawberries and flirted with the in-flight attendants. They treated me very well, and the onboard entertainment became very personal with one young man during a bathroom trip. Well worth the extra money for first-class tickets in my mind, especially with such a talented individual. Back in my seat post-coitally, I relaxed and snoozed. They'd thought of everything, even buying a spare ticket so Posit could sit next to me in a free chair. If you don't know what my Posit is, it's my werewolf soul. He's a separate thing to me. He's like a ghost. But he was given a seat to sit in next to me, so this was heaven. Well, that is what I like to think anyway. Not that they did not trust me with interacting with many people. So I had my Posit on the right and this guy on my left, and that guy would only be my only interaction. And that's when they fucked up. The whiskey was warm. The bitch brought my Macallan warm. This was it. I'd had enough. I reached up and grabbed her by her throat as she tried to pull away, apologising. This was a step too far. I dragged her face towards mine. At a couple of inches from my face, I told her, "My Macallan is warm." She wriggled and screamed and tried to strike me with her free hand. My Posit lying in his seat sat up, showing interest in what was happening. Finally, he transmitted into my brain. Finally, some fun. He tore into my body and I transformed, my body inflating and coagulating into the wolfman. Far too large for the constraints of the seats, I ripped and tore into them around me. My head hit the roof of the cabin and crumpled the paneling as I raged, tearing myself an ample enough space in which to stand. Bedlam reigned around me as I turned into the real me. All through this process, the hostess dangled from my claw. The horror in her face was evident, and she drooped like a rag doll in my hand. Once changed, I turned my beast-style head in her direction and snorted my anger from my nostrils, blowing hair away from her face. Then silence. The entire plane was silent. Only the background noise of the engines and my heavy breathing could be heard. All focus was deservedly on me. She broke first and let out a banshee's wail. Her very heart and soul's loss were carried on that eulogy of burning pain. I drew the screaming woman towards my growling jaws, and delicately and with emphasis for all to see and feel, I bit deep into her throat, enjoying the blast of blood from her torn carotid arteries as it poured into my mouth and ran down my chest. Her head slumped back on the remains of her neck, and she fell limp and dead. I lifted the body high and let my rage free by letting slip a roar that reverberated down the length of the plane. The body was now useless in my hand, so for maximum effect I ripped her apart, showering the closest people with blood and guts. For a moment all became quiet and still, but not for long. I wanted to murder more. The people were in utter disbelief at this moment. This could not be real. I sniffed the remains of the body and broke open the ribcage like a fortune cookie. Then using my index claw of my right hand, I pierced and plucked the still beating heart from the body of the woman. I I gently placed it in my mouth and sucked on it as though it was a sweet candy. The people just watched this display. No movement, no fear, no noise, and I believe no hope. They were trapped in a flying cigar tube in the sky with a monster. When the screams came, they came in unison. The waft of their intense fear washed over me. It made the hairs of my pelt rise in the light of their loss. They were now panicking and trying to clear themselves out of their seats, desperately trying to scramble away from the maddened creature that had somehow just appeared before them. They were pushing and banging one another out of the way in their haste. Some fell to the ground to be stepped on. These were crushed and smeared into the floor by feet of those hell-bent on escaping. I came back into the moment, killing my other travelling companion in the chair next to me, the now trapped fat businessman who had the annoying flatulence on the journey. A wolf's nose is very sensitive, stared up at me, his mouth open in an O. I stamped him into his seat, into a bloody pulp, the razor-tipped claws of my feet tearing him and the upholstery into one bloody pile. His two ugly kids and his plump wife at home would never have the pleasure of the fat, sweaty farter back in their lives. You would have been convinced that the plane was shaking with turbulence, but it was not the turbulence, it was my anger that rocked out on that plane. The emergency oxygen mask fell limply and pointlessly in front of the seats, not something that was going to help these people right now, while I spent a couple of moments tearing my way from between the seats. Once free, I continued my way to the front of the plane, ripping and mauling all that stood in my way. The crowd was getting in each other's way now. I had no resistance from these poor foes as I grabbed a body here and there, eviscerating and dissecting them in vicious and violent ballet-like performance. Moving to the front of the plane meant that I had to remove seats in order to let me pass. Some of the seats I tore out still had the passengers in them. These were easy kills, tearing them bodily from the uncomfy chairs and crushing the mangled remains before tossing them behind me as I moved on. Some tried to hide from me in their fear. Some sat there unmoving, frozen in terror at my forward movement. Some tried to run, but I had nowhere to go. This was not like shooting fish in a barrel. It was like mauling humans in a flying metal tube. It was easy, and soon none stood anymore. The floor of the plane was a pool of cooling blood. Chunks of flesh were pushed to and fro as the blood lapped back and forth like some horrific red tide. Most were dead, some were dying. None would survive this journey. I'd made my way to the cockpit, tearing off the terrorist not werewolf-proof door, and dragged my huge frame inside the cramped space. The cockpit was dark. Two men sat staring at me, blinking stupidly. They'd been watching the whole massacre on the little CCTV display of the cabin as the autopilot did the real flying for them. I grabbed both of the pilots, one with each hand, as they panicked and simply crushed them in my grasp. Tearing each of them apart with my jaws, I then began to smash into the controls of the plane. I knew that I would have to turn off the autopilot to make the thing crash, but in this form it was just about ripping the cockpit apart until all the warning lights and buzzers stopped and the aircraft started plummeting from the sky. I had created a work of art of my greatest proportions, over 400 broken and dead in one moment of work. Maybe I would die too. Here was the test of my own immortality. The nose of the plane fell forward and the windscreen of the plane became the floor. Blood poured into the cockpit from the passenger compartment of the aircraft. It carried bits and pieces of people in with it. I broke into wolfy laughter at the chaos created in this moment. The world became a spinning, whirling world of fury as we fell. I felt sheer joy in the moment. I smiled at the thoughts that had just passed through my head and took a sip from my chilled Macallan. I thanked the hostess with a smile that she would remember for the rest of her life. They, the people that ruled me, could never control my dreams. I could do anything in my head, and destroying normality is always a dream that fills it. I would have to wait. I will make it a dream come true at some point. I must have been mellowing in my old age. I had not lost control for a very long time in public. In fact, the last few missions had been somewhat casualty-free. Not very much collateral damage. I must have been slipping, or maybe it was a plan. Who would know but me? I'd flown from Edinburgh to JFK, New York. At the gate, I had met the usual two dicks. Two CIA-suited assholes who were looking more like CIA agents than you can imagine. Again, they were uncommunicative, using very few words. They shepherded me between gates. I stopped to eat and made them wait uncomfortably in my non-compliance. I enjoyed their discomfort. They were dicks. The next gate had no plane waiting at it, but a car at the bottom of the steps that took me out to a large transport helicopter. "Any idea where I'm going, dicks?" I asked my handlers. "No, sir. We have no idea," they replied in a coordinated reply. At least they were polite. The helicopter took me somewhat north of the Great Lakes in America, I think. GPS is a wonderful thing, and for some reason they'd let me keep my phone on this journey. We'd been travelling for a few hours, and a lot of it had been over woodland. The two dicks had left me to be babysat by a team of 8 heavily armed American Marines. I had been ordered to sit at the back of the compartment, so obviously I moved to the front and stood in front of the commanding officer, standing solidly, staring into his eyes until he moved for me from his own seat. "I thought so," I smiled, looking at him as I took his seat, and he moved to the back of the helicopter. The soldiers showed him no lack of respect for his action. They just accepted it. I wondered what they'd been told of me. Maybe they'd been told not to piss me off. It was often the way, and we were off. When we got to wherever we were going, the soldiers motioned me towards the door. As soon as the door opened, I grabbed my bag and stepped off the chopper. I literally stepped out of the hold into the night air while laughing. On hitting the ground, I landed my now usual deep lunge superhero landing, very Celeste-like, from Underworld the movie. I looked up at the open doorway above and at 3 faces that I waved my thanks to before standing. I'd fallen into a small clearing and looked around the woodland site. I took in the sounds and smells of the forest and recognised one scent above all. He was here. The chief. The chief stood on the edge of the clearing in plain view. He nodded at me and motioned me to follow after him. He was dressed in a way I'd never seen before. It was most un-army-like. He was wearing outdoorsman clothing, including colours and everything, not his usual army fatigues. I caught up to him and walked alongside him in silence. He turned and smiled at me. He was always a man of few words, and this was about as good a greeting that he ever gave. We continued to walk to a campsite by a lake with a couple of tents around a central fire pit. Outside the tents was a lot of gear, including fishing rods and rifle bags. This was unlike any job that I'd ever been on before. It almost as felt as if it was meant to be something else. I would wait patiently to see what the evening brought. I was feeling a little uncomfy due to my lack of knowledge as to what was happening. The chief sat down in a camp chair and reached towards the fire, warming his hands, and then without words asked me to take a seat by him. It must have been cold, but I, as usual, had not really noticed. I sat and stared into the flames while I tried to work out the angle that they were trying to work on me. What was this? Kind of a setup? "Would you like a beer, Will?" the chief asked. "Of course," I replied and nodded. He reached down beside the seat and into a plastic cooler and brought out a bottle of Budweiser, from which he removed the cap, then passed it to me without a word. He got himself a drink, which he opened and sat back, taking a large swig, then wiping his mouth and gave a huge sigh. The evening was truly beautiful. The sky a dark blanket with a dusting of stars. We must have been away from any large conurbations with their light that ruined stargazing. We sat in silence for a long time, drinking and admiring the view. The sounds of nature were in full abound. The crickets chirped in the background and I could sense life around us. I sensed the rodents beneath the ground. I sensed the herd of deer that settled down for the night at some distance. The owl in the tree above us on the hunt. A bear in the distance, full and content. We were surrounded by life, yet on our own utterly. I sensed no other human being within miles of us. No smells, no unnatural noise. We were truly alone. At this realization I smiled. Someone had been a bit foolish, and at this point I knew that it had not been me. I'd been patient and waited for this opportunity. I knew it eventually would happen, so I grabbed it. The chief spoke. "Well, Will, I thought it was time we spent some time together as friends. We are friends now, aren't we?" I nodded and smiled as I raised my bottle to him and toasted him. Inside, I was smiling. "You've done a lot of amazing work for us, and we're getting a lot of respect from the important people that do and think important things." He took a pack of cigars from his pocket, offering me one before choosing one and reaching for a branch from the fire and lighting it for himself. "It was thought by the powers that be that it was time that we got to know one another properly and see where we're going to go in the future." He paused and puffed life into his cigar. They believe that you're in fact enjoying your job. They think that you're actually feeling some loyalty towards us and our ideals. He was enjoying pontificating with a cigar, emphasizing parts of his language. I smiled and laughed a little. He really had no idea how my head worked. It thrilled me to realize that he was so far away from the truth. What a fucking idiot. The posit rolled around behind him on the floor, laughing madly in my head. Well, I've been thinking of something very different myself, boss. I think that I'm on the point of retirement, I replied. Taking a swig from my bottle and leaning forward, I rested my elbows on my knees and looked directly at him. The chief hesitated and sat back in his seat, removing his cap and scratching his head, obviously in irritation. I think that I have made a grave mistake then, he said. He then paused and turned to look at me. I assumed that we had become friends and that we could work together in the future. I'm sorry, boss, I said, leaning back comfortably in my seat and finishing the rest of my beer. I don't want to do this shit anymore. It's been fun, but I don't like being told what to do by anyone, so I was just really waiting for an opportunity to be able to quit. I sighed. This has become an excellent opportunity for me to quit in person to you. I can't sense anyone within miles. Normally you would have covered at least a squad or two, but I can't smell or sense anyone. I paused and for dramatic effect sniffed the darkening evening air. No one's here for you. I left a long pause and gave a beatific smile. I am afraid no one is here except me. Again I looked directly at him and pointed to my chest. I should therefore imagine that it would take a while for a rescue party to get here. And I should imagine that they are on their way now. I looked at the skies in a pretense of searching for the black helicopters. Yes, Will, you are quite correct. They are a few miles away and they are listening to this conversation. I miscalculated our relationship, huh? He said, taking off his hat and scratching his head as he smiled up at me. I'm afraid so. We're supposed to have built a rapport between us, I mean you and me. We're supposed to be friends by now. I get that, and through that I would have been much easier to manipulate for whatever ends that they needed doing. I think that they have underestimated my level of psychotic rage. Still, because you've been mostly a good master, I will make it quick, and then I will disappear into the forest. Thank you for this opportunity, boss, I said, giving him a courteous nod. Is there any way I can change your mind, Will? He asked. He paused, looking up at me from his seat. More money? Less work? Pick and choose the things you do? He questioned. No, boss. I want my freedom. I want to live for me again, I replied. I stood up in front of him and smiled as he took a long drag on his smoke. One moment, Will. Let me enjoy this last guilty pleasure. I nodded and waited as he drank his last beer and smoked his last cigar. Okay, he said as he crushed the butt beneath his foot and tossed the empty bottle behind him where it broke on the rocks. I'm ready. Well, Chief, first of all, I have to admit that I knew about this operation that we are on today. I believe it was codenamed Operation Getting to Know You. I sang the line from the King and I musical and then laughed. In turn, I have planned for today as well. Posit and I nodded at Posit. If you don't know what Posit is, it's my werewolf soul. He's a separate entity. He looks like a wolf. Please go and listen to the other interviews. I'll go to werewolf.host to have a read about what posits are. Okay, because I can't be asked going over it again. I nodded at Posit. We did some spying of our very own behind your back. We found out where you and your lovely wife, Martha, live. Ah, Martha, Martha, Martha. What? He asked as his face became a concerned mask. You did what? Oh, fuck, no. The chief looked down at his feet, shaking his head and bringing his hands up to cover his face and lean forward. Oh, fuck. Yes, Michael. Oh, fuck, I said. I paused as I let the enormity of this situation sink in. I did not want to rush him into his realization. I wanted to savour its deep flavour. Yes, it was a long and difficult journey to Bilth Wells. Did most of it in the back of a truck so I could keep it all a little secret from you guys. Your people have been a bit lax recently with security and shit since you trusted me. I added the air quotes with my fingers as I said trusted. You know, now that we are friends, you even believe me that my tracking devices fell out? You've a beautiful home, Michael, or is it Mike? I prefer Michael. I think it suits you. I had you down as a Billy for some reason. I turned away and taken a deep breath of the cool night air. Your home, Michael, is very nice. The money you earn keeps you in good stead with a nice bit of land and woodland too. I bet there are a few trout in that lake nearby. Again I paused. I really thought you were American, you know. Had not the foggiest that you were a fucking Welshie. A taff, isn't it? Anyways, to get back to my salient point, the house and the grounds were not even being watched. I used all your training that you gave me to check it all out, and the posit did a sweep of the house and just found one woman at home. She was upstairs in the green bedroom at the back of the cottage. It has a nice Victorian brass bedstead and a wood-burning stove, and an ensuite bathroom, which is always a lovely touch. All white Italian porcelain, very nice. She was sound asleep. The chief looked up at me for a moment. The distress was evident in his face. No hate at this point. No wanting revenge, just distress and disbelief. Oh, fuck, Will, you didn't. He stuttered. You fucking didn't. Please tell me. My Martha will. He held his face in his hands again and sat staring into the fire, tears forming in his eyes. Sorry about Summer and Cloud. Nice dogs. They were a bit noisy though, so you know the drill. I had to kill them. That's one of the first things we do in espionage and all that. I saved the collars though for you. I reached into my duffel bag and pulled out the 2 leather collars and threw them to his feet. Nice bit of leather work there, I laughed. Fuck's sake, he stammered, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Fuck's sake, Will. I smiled and shook my head as I walked over to him and reached beside the fire for another beer. He flinched away from me for a moment. That did make me smile. Yes, Martha, she was beautiful. I held the bottle in front of me as though interested in the label that was stuck there. I returned my focus back to the chief, then I continued. Really, honestly, I can see why you loved her. I mean, she was strong and fierce and so proud of you. I respected her so much. She got very upset when I said I had killed the dogs. I even offered to share them with her. A little ungrateful she was, really. The Koreans get a tenderly beaten dog as a delicacy, or is it the Chinese, or I don't know. I stopped to see if he would give me any reaction, but there was nothing. Her ending was so brutal. She begged and begged and begged, but I bravely managed to live up to my hype and tortured her thoroughly and systematically, just as you taught me. I paused once more, giving him time to unpackage his thoughts. Then I killed her. Her liver was divine. I cliched, only a light drinker, I think. I stopped to tear the top off the bottle and took what seemed like a well-earned swig. Lovely. Oh, she also told me about these. I reached again into my duffel bag and took out some photographs. I looked at them and then him. Nice family. And you can see how much you cared. There were pictures everywhere. Vanessa is doing so well in IT. I showed him a group picture photo and pointed out Vanessa to him. And Nick, a doctor of all things, a proctologist, which is always a strange choice for me, but I suppose someone has to do it, has to get their fingers dirty, as it were, I said, looking at my fingers and wiggling them a little. He should have spotted that prostate cancer that you have. A tough one, eh? You do not know about that, do you? The prostate cancer you have. I can see it plain as day. I kept meaning to tell you, but then I didn't. Hey, but I'm an evil bastard, huh? I shrugged it off. You were dying, and your son could have helped you. Laughable, really. This is little Noah, Vanessa's son, and Autumn, her daughter. You must have been past tense. They're such proud grandparents. How old were they? He did not respond. Oh, come on, Michael, how old? He ran his fingers through his stubble on his chin. It was an audible rasp in the quiet night air. You're a fucking bastard, Will, if you touch them. If you touch them. He started to massage his temples with his eyes closed, the words he spoke getting quieter and less emphasised as he realised his powerless state. His head turned and started looking at me again as though trying to decipher my thoughts. Amazingly, he still had no hate in his eyes, just grief. He just sat shaking his head. I pointed at him, a warning finger, to emphasise my next question. You're going to do what, Michael? You're going to do nothing. You've been playing with me like a fucking toy for years now. You've been using me as a tool. You and yours have been treating me like a dog. I'm a fucking wolf, Michael. A fucking wolf. I have no master. I drew my hand back to my chin and spawned a pose. Looking good. You were dead the day we met. It was just that you did not realise it at the time, Michael. And you are going to suffer for all those powerless moments I had to endure. You, my friend, could not control this. I swept my hand down my front as though I was a piece of evidence. Your bosses should have destroyed me the day they caught me. Their overconfidence and a lack of care have caused this. I have no friends or allegiances. It is just me and my posit. You absolute... I could not think of a decent enough word for the next statement. Dummy? Not a good enough word for this occasion. You as my fucking friend, I laughed and snarled. As though I would want to bow to you and fetch for you like a fucking common mutt. I turned away from him, walking a small distance. Roll over, Will, that's a good boy. Sit, boy, fucking stay. Here's a biscuit. Mumble, mumble, mumble. Turning to face him once more, and with spit flying from my mouth, I shouted, No! I don't think he was listening at this point. Will, he repeated, head in his hands, rocking back and forth in his seat. Anyway, I promise you this, your family is dead. I will wipe all that you hold dear from the earth. I know where they live and what they do, and with all the fantastic training that you gave me, I will get to them and I will kill them. The only good thing from your point of view is that you will not be around to know this. He sobbed. I could sense him breaking. He was crying. At last this man showed some emotion. At last the confidence was gone and he was falling apart in front of me. I smiled at my posit and he spoke into my mind. This is beautiful, Will, beautiful. Physical torture does not touch this. It's been a long time in coming, but it's so good to see. My posit was delighted. Martha died proudly, my friend. Again I grinned. Then checking my nails, I added, she died painfully but proudly. While she was acting proudly for a bit, I looked at him again. She did beg to live, then beg to die after I'd started my work. I have it here on record if you wish to watch it with me. I offered him my phone. He ignored me. No, I guess not, I said. I pressed play on the phone and the screaming and crying began in the background. I switched it off and put the phone back in my pocket. It wasn't my best work, to be honest, I sniffed. He slowly got up out of his seat and walked away from me to the other side of the fire. He paused and put his head in his hands once more. I watched closely, trying to gauge the man's next actions. It turned out that he just stood there, and he started to shake and shudder as the emotions of loss and grief overtook his frame. Eventually he turned to me, tears in his eyes and looking at me in disbelief. Why? He really could not understand what was happening. It's in my nature, Chief. Let me quote a few things that you labelled me with quite early on. One of the gifts of being a werewolf is I have a didactic memory. So the shit you said to those important people in that room all that time ago, I can quote it for you. I then gave him a list verbatim. 1. An all-around evil son of a bitch, I smiled. That's only true if you define my acts as evil. I must admit, though, I like it. Oh, my mum was not a bitch either. She was just a normal human woman doing her best. 2. He may look like a kind and gentle fellow, but let me tell you that he is one of the most psychotic and brutal killers I have ever had the pleasure to meet. That's true, I laughed. Although psychotic lends itself to the fact that I have some kind of medical issue or something, my psychotic tendencies to me are a blessing. Just my predatory thing. When I kill, I do care about it. Well, most of the time anyways. I do have to eat. 3. He is a cannibal and a child killer and has personally dispatched untold numbers of people into the next world with his own hands or claws or teeth or whatever. That's not really true. I'm not really a cannibal, to be honest, although the rest of it is quite correct. I've never eaten a werewolf. 4. He is a consummate liar and a narcissist of the highest order. This is also true, but I have to say, look at me. Of course I love myself. Who would not? Oh yes, you would not right now. I pulled a sad face and then made a big full smile. 5. He is incredibly charismatic and the most dangerous living thing to strike the Western world since smallpox. Such flattery, I said, waving a hand at him in a very camp manner. 6. He has already remembered your face and your smell and whatever else his senses tell him, and he will probably in the future want to kill you for this humiliation. I don't think that I'll have time to get all of them. 1 or 2 will just have to do. 7. I know he wants to kill me. I paused for dramatic effect, taking my hand to my brow and then sweep it in his direction. Correctamundo, I proclaimed, and I'm going to, and everyone you know and love. He fell to his knees, rocking back and forth as he let go of his emotions. Taking his head in his hands, he fell forward with his forehead onto the ground. The close-cropped grass muffled his despair. I walked over to him, standing over him like the god of wrath that I was. Do you know who Fenrir was in Norse mythology? I asked. My posit is called Fenrir. If I have to remind you, I paused to wait for his answer, but rudely he just continued to sob. Disgusted, I kicked him onto his side where he took up a pitiful fetal position. I asked, do you know who Fenrir was? Which god we become as a beast? What my destiny is? Still no response. Well, we are the killer of Odin, the All-Father. I stood above his prone body, gesticulating to the sky. They tethered me at the bottom of the world tree because they feared my power. They tricked me into being trapped for their pleasure, much like you did, Michael. Teased me even. Then when I broke free, I ate him. I ate Odin and brought about the end of the world. Fucking Ragnarok. I yelled to the heavens, expecting the clash of thunder to punctuate my sentence. It didn't. Fucking annoying, that. I slowly dropped my arms and gave my bowing thanks to my imaginary audience of fans. Then I crouched down close to him, a little calmer. Sorry, I whispered in his ear. The amateur dramatics in my soul just took over. I patted him softly and laughed. Hey, it was not bad though, was it? I mean, if you take that all into account, I'm likening you to Odin. How fucking cool is that? He turned his face up to me and smiled. 5-star mental will, Fenrir or whatever. I struck only one blow to his head. I promised a quick death. It crushed his skull and he lay still. He was very dead, and I watched over him as he cooled in the evening air, listening to the crackle of the fire. I drank the remains of my beer and set the bottle down on the ground very carefully. I did feel a little sorry for the man, which shocked me. He'd been my master, my handler, but part of me had actually kind of liked him. I then heard the noise of the choppers in the distance as they were making their way to us. I changed, absorbing my posit, and became Fenrir the god, while staring at the old man lying there. He had trusted me. What a fool. I laughed as a human, and throughout my transformation, then to a laugh as a wolf, the laugh becoming a guttural and unhuman sound. With one last look about, I ran into the trees. I would be hunted for a while, but they would regret that choice. They would just let me go. Now I knew of them. I knew how their systems they used worked, so I knew how to defeat them. This would be my greatest adventure. I was dealing with the best. The world had... and they were hunting me. The hunters were going to be the hunted.